At 5:54 in the morning, a mother came home from her overnight shift. She had worked all night. She was tired. She probably just wanted to check on her babies and get some rest. But when she walked through that door, what she found stopped everything. Her 8-year-old daughter. Unresponsive. Not breathing. And the man she had left in charge was already gone. No call to emergency services. No attempt to get help. Just gone. What happened inside that apartment between the time that mother left for work and the time she came back home is a story that this community needs to hear. Because it raises questions that go far beyond one apartment in Bakersfield. Questions about who we allow into our children's lives. Questions about what happens when the people meant to protect our children don't. This is the story of Maya Alexander. And we are not going to look away. Welcome to Unseen Stories. I want to take a moment before we get into this, because this one is personal. Not personal in the sense that I knew this family, but personal in the sense that this little girl looked like somebody's daughter, somebody's niece, somebody's baby cousin. And when you see her face, those big brown eyes, those colorful hair clips, those purple glasses she wore as she got older, you feel it. You feel what was lost. Her name was Jeremiah Amamira Alexander, but the people who loved her called her Maya. And today we are going to tell her story the right way. With truth, with facts, with respect for who she was and what she deserved. We are going to walk through this together, from the beginning, and we are not going to skip the hard parts. Because Maya's story deserves to be told in full. Not in pieces, not softened down, in full. So let's start at the very beginning. Jeremiah Amamira Alexander was born on October 12, 2011, in Bakersfield, California. From day one, this little girl had a presence. You know how some children just light up a room without even trying? Maya was that child. She had big brown eyes, dark hair that her family always kept styled in braids, fastened with colorful clips that matched her personality perfectly. As she got older, she started wearing a pair of purple eyeglasses that somehow made her look even more like herself. Like they were made for her face. Her cousin Demand described her as, and I want you to hear this exactly as it was said, smart, supportive, hardworking, and very understanding. Her other cousin, Alea, was especially close to her. Alea referred to Maya as, my baby. Now when a cousin calls you their baby, that tells you something about the kind of energy Maya carried. She was the kind of child that made the people around her feel something, made them want to hold on to her. At school, Maya was a student who took her work seriously. She earned the Outstanding Achievement Award. Her teacher, Miss Kennedy, spoke about her and said, Jeremiah performed good work in all academic areas, even though she'd occasionally get in trouble for talking too much in class. I love that, because that is a real child. That is a whole, complete, living, breathing little girl who worked hard and also could not stop talking because she had too much to say. And honestly, good for her. She loved church. She never forgot her prayers. She had a spiritual depth to her that you do not often see in an 8-year-old child, and her family recognized it. They saw it. They talked about it. She loved her little brothers fiercely. Always kept the peace between them. Always looked out. Big sister energy at 8 years old. And there are photographs, real photographs from her life, that give you glimpses into who she was before everything happened. In one, she is cradling a green sippy cup while wearing teal Dora the Explorer footy pajamas. In another, she is smiling at the camera next to her daddy, wearing a purple princess crown. In yet another, she is carrying a handful of birthday balloons and a card full of cash, looking like she was absolutely living her best life. And then there are the pictures of Maya and Alea. Countless pictures, posing for the camera together, smiling, being cousins, being best friends. Every single photograph captures the same thing. A happy, healthy little girl. One who was clearly adored. That was Maya. 8 years old. Full of life. Full of love. Full of future. And on March 18, 2020, all of that was taken from her. Now before we get into what happened, we need to understand the full picture of who was in Maya's life at the time. Because context matters in a story like this. Context is everything. Maya's mother was a 33-year-old woman named Amber Fisher. Amber worked as a caregiver, someone whose job at its core was to look after people who needed protection. She worked overnight shifts. She was trying to provide for her family. And at the time of this story, she was in a relationship with a 37-year-old man named Clint Damon Mason. Now here is what we know about Clint Mason and Amber's relationship going into that night. They had been together for 5 years. This was not a new situation. This was not somebody Amber had just met. Clint was also the father of Amber's youngest son, so he was embedded in this family. He was living in this space. He was a presence in these children's daily lives. But here is where it gets complicated and where the community conversation really begins. The family described the relationship between Amber and Clint as volatile. That is the word they used, volatile. They said the relationship included police involvement. They said there had been situations serious enough that law enforcement had been called. Though reportedly, neither party had ever filed formal charges for family violence. And yet, life continued. The relationship continued. And Clint Mason continued to have access to Maya. Now I am not here to put everything on one person or to make this a simple story with simple answers. Because the reality is, situations like this are almost never simple. People stay in complicated relationships for complicated reasons. That is human. That is real life. But what we have to be willing to do, as a community, is look at what those decisions can mean for the children involved. Because the children do not get to make those choices. They're just there, living inside whatever world the adults around them have created. And Maya was just there, living in that apartment, in that situation, at 8 years old, with no say, no choice, no way out. On the evening of March 17, 2020, Amber left for her overnight shift as a caregiver. She left her children in the care of Clint Mason. Now, there were other children present in that apartment that night. Not just Maya. Other children were there. And what those children witnessed that night is something that will stay with them. Because children remember. Children always remember. At 9:30 p.m., inside that apartment, Amber's security cameras were recording. Now let me tell you about these cameras. Because this detail is important and it is one of the most significant parts of this entire story. Amber had installed security cameras throughout their apartment. And the reason she installed them, reportedly, was to monitor one of her sons who had a skin condition. She wanted to be able to check in on him while she was away, to make sure he was not irritating his skin behind her back. That was the original purpose of those cameras. She could not have known what those cameras would eventually capture. At 9:30 p.m. on March 17th, one of those cameras captured a scene inside that apartment involving Maya. The footage showed Maya bent over a piece of furniture, with Clint Mason standing over her, holding a metal rod. And what followed was a prolonged and severe act of harm against this 8-year-old child that went on, and on, and on. I'm going to be measured in how I describe this. Because we are a community channel and we operate with integrity. But I also need you to understand the gravity of what those cameras captured. Because it was not a moment. It was not brief. It was extended. It was deliberate. And it was captured on video in a way that left absolutely no room for interpretation. During this, Clint Mason could be heard saying, "I don't give a blank. This is what you wanted and this is not going to end well for you. Trust me when I tell you that." As Maya continued to cry out and beg him to stop, he said, "Want me to put my leg in your neck?" Read those words back. This is what he said to an 8-year-old child. Now, at some point during this, Clint Mason realized the camera was recording. So he walked over and pointed it away from himself, away from what was happening. But here is where his plan completely fell apart. The camera was motion activated, and it was mounted on a swivel. So the moment he pointed it away, and the moment movement resumed in that room, the camera swung right back, and kept recording. Every single thing that happened in that apartment that night was on camera. Every single thing. After what he put Maya through that night, she could not walk on her own. Clint reportedly had to carry her upstairs to her bedroom. She told him she felt sick. She told him she was having trouble breathing. He did not call for help. He put her to bed. And then he went to sleep. Around 5 o'clock in the morning on March 18, 2020, Clint Mason went to check on Maya. And he found her unresponsive. It was at that point, not before, not when she first told him she felt sick, not when she could not walk, but at that point, that he reached out to Amber. He called her at work, in tears. And these are his exact words. "You need to come home. Something wrong with Maya. I don't think she's breathing. Something wrong with her." Amber came home immediately. She arrived at 5:54 in the morning. She found her daughter exactly as Clint had described. Unresponsive. Not breathing. She called 911. Emergency services were dispatched to apartment number 5 at 2711 San Dimas Street in Bakersfield, California. First responders arrived and found Maya with obvious signs of trauma across her body. They did not hesitate. They rushed her to Dignity Health Memorial Hospital. Doctors fought for her life. They used every tool available to them to try to bring this little girl back. But it was too late. Jeremiah Maya Alexander was pronounced dead later that same day. She was 8 years old. And her extended family, because of pandemic-related restrictions that were in place at the time, were not even allowed to be at the hospital to say goodbye to her. Let that sit with you for a moment. This child left this world, and the people who loved her most could not even be in the room. Now, the medical examiner's findings in this case are important, and I want to walk through them carefully because they speak directly to what happened to Maya that night. The autopsy determined that Jeremiah died as a result of multiple contributing factors. The first was hypoxic respiratory failure, which means her body was not getting enough oxygen to sustain life. This was brought on by a combination of acute pneumonia and something called sickle cell trait. Now, sickle cell trait is different from sickle cell disease. People with sickle cell trait inherit one sickle cell gene and one normal gene. The vast majority of people with this trait live completely normal lives with zero symptoms. But in rare cases, under specific physical conditions like low oxygen levels, dehydration, or extreme physical stress on the body, complications can occur. There is no information to suggest that Maya had ever experienced any prior complications from her sickle cell trait. She was a healthy child. But here is the critical piece. And this is where a clinical expert who was consulted on this case provides essential clarity. A clinical pharmacist who treats patients reviewed the medical examiner's findings and explained that cause of death in a case like this tends to be multifaceted. This expert advised that all of Maya's medical findings, the pneumonia, the respiratory failure, could have been directly caused by the physical trauma she experienced that night. Not by a pre-existing illness, by the trauma. The expert explained that when significant force is applied to the chest, the impact can cause damage to the lungs and airways. That damage triggers an inflammatory response. And pneumonia, at its core, is the filling of the lung tissue with fluid. Fluid that does not belong there. Fluid that makes breathing impossible. So when you hear the various medical terms in Maya's autopsy, understand what they are actually saying. They are saying that an 8-year-old girl's body was pushed so far beyond what it could endure, that it shut down. The manner of her death was ruled a homicide. When Amber came home and found Maya, Clint Mason was gone. He had left on foot. No vehicle. No plan. Just gone. Bakersfield Police Department immediately issued a BOLO, a be on the lookout order, for Clint Damon Mason. They described him as a black male, 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighing 235 pounds with a slight limp. He was last seen wearing a black hooded sweatshirt. Police noted that he had family in the Los Angeles area, where he was originally from, and that he may be attempting to head south. An arrest warrant was obtained for Mason almost immediately, and the community was asked to help. How far did he think he was going to get? A concerned citizen saw the BOLO, and they did exactly what we always say people should do. They saw something, and they said something. Within 1 day of Maya being found, Clint Mason was located at a Motel 6 in Inglewood, California. 1 day. He made it 116 miles before it was over. Bakersfield police traveled to Inglewood and took him into custody, without incident, at that motel. He was extradited back to Bakersfield, held without bail at the Lerdo Pretrial Detention Center. And he faced 3 felony counts: first-degree murder, torture, and willful cruelty to a child. He was arraigned on March 22, 2020, and he faced a possible life sentence. Now let me tell you about what investigators found when they began building their case. Because the cameras, those same cameras Amber installed to watch over her son, those cameras handed investigators everything they needed. Amber turned the footage over to police. And what was on those cameras documented the events of that night with a level of detail that left Clint Mason with nowhere to go. The video evidence was described as shocking by everyone who reviewed it. And beyond the video, Clint Mason himself spoke to investigators. He told them what he did. He told them why he did it. He said he did it because Maya had not completed her household chores. Because she had not finished her homework. That was his reason. An 8-year-old child. And that was the reason he gave. I want to ask you something. and I want you to really sit with this question. What does it say about how someone views a child? When they believe that a child not finishing their homework is something that warrants that level of response. What does that tell you about how that child was seen in that home? Because the way you respond to a child tells you everything about whether you see that child as a human being deserving of grace, or as something else entirely. Something less. Something that needs to be controlled rather than guided. Disciplined rather than loved. And Maya deserved to be loved. News of what happened to Maya spread quickly through Bakersfield and beyond. Her family was devastated. Completely gutted. And in the middle of that devastation, during a global pandemic that had already turned the world upside down, they had to figure out how to grieve, how to honor her, how to begin to process something that should never have happened. Maya's cousin, Dean Coleman, set up a GoFundMe campaign on behalf of the family. And in it he wrote, "On March 18, 2020, the family of 8-year-old Jeremiah's lives were changed forever. Jeremiah was tragically killed early morning Wednesday. At this time, the family is facing a difficult time and are asking for support at this time of grief. Jeremiah was such a beautiful, smart, sweet little girl. She had the brightest smile, supportive, hardworking, and very understanding. She always made those around her smile. At such a young age and so full of life, she made a difference in everyone and cared deeply about the people she crossed. She was always a big help to her little brothers who will miss her dearly. She always wanted peace and never no negativity. Maya was also such a spiritual little girl, always wanted to pray to God. It is so devastating for the family to be going through this. With sweet regards, the family at this time appreciate all the support and help in advance. Please continue to keep the family in your prayers." Read that. Read every word of that. That is not a police report. That is not a court document. That is a family trying to find words, in the middle of unspeakable pain, for a child they loved. A child who always wanted peace. A child who never wanted negativity. A child who always wanted to pray. Maya's aunt spoke to local news cameras shortly after her niece's passing. And she said, "I got a phone call this morning from someone stating that my niece Maya was unresponsive at her mom's house, and to get to the hospital. So I got in my car and proceeded to go to Memorial Hospital. That's when we find out that she was deceased." Can you imagine receiving that phone call? Can you imagine getting in your car, driving to that hospital, and walking in to find out your niece is gone? The family also spoke about Clint Mason directly. They described him in plain terms. Very negative person. Very violent person. We've had altercations with him before and had to call the police because he's a very violent individual. Now, this is the part of this story that opens up the larger community conversation. Because if the family knew, if there had been prior situations serious enough to involve law enforcement, if the word violent was the word this family used to describe this man, then how did he end up alone with Maya? That is not a question I ask to attack anyone. That is a question I ask because it is the question that this entire situation forces us to confront. Collectively. As a community. Because if we are going to honor Maya, we have to be honest about all of it. Now, I want to be very clear about something before we go further. What Clint Mason did is on Clint Mason. Full stop. He is the one who made that choice. He is the one who stood over that child. He is the one who ran. He is the one who let hours pass before any help was called. That accountability belongs to him and him alone. But there is a second conversation that this case, and too many cases like it, forces us to have. And it is a conversation about our children. About who we place in their lives. About the decisions that adults make that directly shape the safety, or the danger, of the children in their care. One voice in the community said it simply. As women, we have to be careful who we allow our children around, who we allow into our lives first and foremost, and then most importantly, we're responsible for these children. So I think we have to be aware and careful about the type of men that we allow our children to be around. And another voice raised a question that a lot of people were asking. What in the world would make this mother think that it would be okay for her to leave her 8-year-old daughter with this 38-year-old man while she went to work? Does she bear some responsibility for this? Because if you've already had run-ins, the family has already said that they've had run-ins with this man before, he's been violent, they've had to call the police. Don't know what the nature of those run-ins were, but any sort of violent tendency or any sort of violent run-in would make you have a second thought, I would think, about leaving their child with this person to watch them. These are fair questions. Hard questions, but fair ones. Because here is the truth. and it is a truth that applies beyond this one story. Our children cannot advocate for themselves. They cannot choose who comes into their lives. They cannot read the room the way adults can. They cannot pack a bag and leave. They are dependent, completely and totally dependent, on the adults around them to make decisions that keep them safe. And that is a weight, a real weight, one that every parent, every guardian, every adult figure in a child's life carries, whether they acknowledge it or not. The people we allow into our children's lives must be held to the highest standard, not the standard of convenience, not the standard of what is available right now, the highest standard, because the cost of getting that wrong, as this story shows us, can be irreversible. After Clint Mason was arrested and charged, the case moved into the legal system. And here is where the timeline gets complicated, not because of anything unusual, but because of the world we were living in. March 2020. You remember what was happening. The pandemic had just begun to shut everything down. Courts were operating on reduced capacity. Cases were backlogged. Legal proceedings that would normally move at a certain pace were now crawling. Ann Maya's case, like so many others from that period, went quiet in the public eye for nearly 2 years. But the case did not disappear. It moved. Slowly, but it moved. On February 22, 2022, almost 2 full years after Maya's passing, Clint Damon Mason, now 39 years old, entered a plea of no contest to first-degree murder. As part of that plea agreement, the 2 additional charges of torture and willful cruelty to a child were dropped. Now, I know how that lands. I know how it feels to hear that additional charges were removed as part of a deal. And I understand the frustration. I share it. But here is the reality of how the legal system operates, especially in the aftermath of a period where courts were overwhelmed and backlogs were severe. District attorneys across the country were making deals at a rate that was unprecedented, because the alternative was cases sitting unresolved for even longer with families in limbo. Some people see plea agreements as a mercy, sparing families the prolonged agony of a trial. Others see it as the system not delivering full accountability. Both of those perspectives are valid. Both of them are real. What is also real is this. On March 22, 2022, Clint Damon Mason was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. According to his listing with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, Clint Mason will be eligible for a parole suitability hearing in January of 2032. He is currently serving his sentence at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility State Prison in Corcoran. 25 years to life. For Maya. Due to pandemic restrictions, Maya's family was only allowed to hold a small, private gathering to honor their little girl. But even within those limitations, that family showed up for her. Maya was laid to rest in a fluffy white casket with a flower pattern. That casket was transported in a motorcycle-drawn carriage. Her final resting place is the Union Cemetery in Bakersfield, California. She was buried next to her first cousin once removed, Christy Allen, who had passed away just 1 month prior due to an illness. And Maya's headstone, a simple piece of granite, is decorated with etchings of a crown and a unicorn, and a photograph of that smiling 8-year-old in happier times. Beneath her birth and death dates, the headstone reads, "Your wings were ready, but our hearts were not." A crown, a unicorn, a smile. That is how her family chose to remember her. Not by what was taken from her, but by who she was. A little girl who wore purple glasses, who talked too much in class, who kept the peace between her brothers, who never forgot her prayers, who earned the Outstanding Achievement Award, who carried birthday balloons and a card full of cash like she owned the world, who smiled next to her daddy in a purple princess crown. That little girl deserved every single day she did not get. Before we close, I want to speak directly to this community, because that is why we are here. We do not tell these stories just to recount facts. We tell them because they matter. Because the children at the center of them mattered. And because if we walk away from a story like this without asking ourselves the hard questions, then we have not done right by Maya. So here is what this story teaches us. The people in our children's lives must be vetted with the same seriousness we give to anything else that matters. You would not hand your child something you knew could hurt them. You would not send your child into a space you knew was unsafe. Apply that same standard to the people. Every time. Without exception. We all have a role in protecting children, not just their parents. The concerned citizen who saw the bolo for Clint Mason and made that call, that person matters in this story. That person is part of how justice moved. You do not have to be a teacher. You do not have to be a social worker. You do not have to be law enforcement. When something does not look right, when something does not feel right, say something. Every single time. And this one is for anyone in this community who might be navigating their own complicated situation right now. Your children are watching. They are absorbing. They are forming their understanding of what love looks like, what safety looks like, what they deserve, based on what they see in their home. The greatest gift you can give them is an environment where they feel safe. Truly safe. Not just physically, but in every way. Maya deserved that. Every child deserves that. Jeremiah Amamira Alexander. Born October 12, 2011. Known to everyone who loved her as Maya. She had big brown eyes, purple glasses, colorful clips in her braids. A spirit that her family said never stopped reaching toward something higher. She was 8 years old, and she is not forgotten. To Maya's family, to Alea who called her my baby, to her cousins, her aunt, her daddy, to everyone who loved this little girl and carries her with them every day, we see you. We honor her with you. And we will keep saying her name. Jeremiah Alexander. Maya. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you want to hold your own children a little closer today, then share it. Because these are the stories that need to stay alive. These are the children that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for being here with Unseen Stories. We will see you in the next one.